At 75, Evelyn Mercer did not lose her home. She was quietly removed from it. No shouting, no slammed doors. Just a thin envelope that had arrived 3 weeks earlier, a firm knock on a Tuesday morning, and two men who spoke in the careful, distant tone reserved for people already considered gone. The spring air carried the faint scent of salt from the distant shore. A mockingbird sang somewhere in the old maple tree that Evelyn's husband had planted 41 years ago, back when their son was still learning to walk. The bird didn't know what was happening. The tree didn't know. The morning light fell across the front porch, the same way it had fallen for 4 decades, golden and indifferent. "Mrs. Mercer," the first man said, not unkindly, but not warmly either. "We're here to finalize the transfer." Evelyn stood in the doorway of the house she had lived in for 42 years. The same doorway where she had once watched her husband Walter carrying groceries in from the truck. Brown paper bags clutched against his chest. Always one more than he could safely manage. The same doorway where her son Michael had run out laughing with untied shoes on his first day of 3rd grade. The same threshold she had crossed 10,000 times without ever thinking it might one day belong to someone else. Now, strangers stood there. They held papers, documents with seals and signatures that said none of it was hers anymore. She did not ask them to come inside. "Is there a mistake?" she asked. Her voice came out steady. That surprised her. She had expected it to shake. The second man glanced at his clipboard. He was younger, perhaps 30, with the kind of face that had not yet learned how to carry bad news without looking away. "The property was placed under review after the estate adjustment," he said. "You were notified." Evelyn let those words settle. "I was notified," she repeated softly. She remembered the envelope, the dense paragraphs of legal language. Words like pursuant and thereto and notwithstanding. She had read it twice, understood almost nothing, and set it aside because the grief was still too heavy to make room for anything else. "I just didn't understand what it meant." There was a pause. The first man shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Behind them, a woman from the legal office stepped forward. Her heels clicked against the concrete walkway like punctuation marks. "We tried to reach you, Ms. Mercer," the woman said. But without a formal response, the claim defaulted. Evelyn looked at her. The woman was perhaps 45. Professional, efficient. The kind of person who had learned to separate paperwork from people. "I buried my husband 6 months ago," Evelyn said. The woman's expression flickered. "Just barely." "I'm sorry for your loss," she replied. Then, almost as an afterthought, "But the process still applies." Of course it did. Processes always did. Evelyn nodded once, not in agreement, in recognition. This was not a conversation she could win. It was not even a conversation. It was a notification dressed up as courtesy. "May I have an hour?" she asked. The men exchanged a glance. Something passed between them. Perhaps discomfort. Perhaps the faint residue of conscience. The first one gave a small nod. 1 hour. That was how long it took to erase a life. 60 minutes. 3,600 seconds. The time it takes to watch half a movie. To drive to the next town and back. To fall asleep and wake up again. Evelyn turned and walked back into the house that was no longer hers. The hallway stretched before her the same way it always had. 12 steps from the front door to the kitchen. She had counted them once years ago when Walter was recovering from his knee surgery, and she needed to know exactly how far he would have to walk. 12 steps. She knew every creak in the floorboards. The one near the coat closet that groaned when you stepped on it. The one by the bathroom door that had been silent for years, and then suddenly started complaining last winter, as if the house itself was getting old alongside her. She walked slowly now, not because she was tired, because she wanted to remember. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the coffee she had made that morning. Walter's mug still sat in the cabinet above the sink. She had not moved it in 6 months. Could not bring herself to. Some mornings she would open that cabinet door just to see it there, just to remember that he had existed, that he had stood in this exact spot 1,000 times, reaching for that same mug, filling it with coffee that was always too strong, drinking it while he read the morning paper. The paper had stopped coming 3 months ago. She had let the subscription lapse. There didn't seem to be any point in reading about a world that kept moving when hers had stopped. Evelyn opened a closet and pulled out a suitcase. It was old brown leather, scuffed at the corners. They had bought it together in 1987 for a trip to see Walter's sister in Vermont. They never made that trip. Something came up. Life came up. The suitcase had sat in this closet ever since, waiting for a journey that never happened. Now it would carry everything she had left. She moved through the rooms methodically, not frantically. There was a certain clarity that came with losing everything. A strange calm. The decisions became simple when there was no room for sentiment. 3 changes of clothes. Practical. Warm. The nights were still cold in Maine this time of year. Her reading glasses, the ones with the thin gold frames that Walter had given her for their 30th anniversary, a small wooden box that held her wedding ring and his. She had taken his off at the funeral home, slipped it into this box, and not opened it since. A photograph. She paused at this one. It sat on the dresser in the bedroom in a simple silver frame. The two of them, young and foolish and so certain that the world would always make sense. Walter's arm around her shoulder, her head tilted slightly toward him. Behind them, this very house, newly painted, full of promise. She did not look at the photograph as she placed it in the suitcase. She couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The rest she left behind. The furniture that had taken years to collect. The books that lined the shelves in the living room. The dishes in the kitchen cabinets, each one carrying some memory she would never be able to explain to anyone else. The wedding china they had used exactly twice. The cast-iron skillet that had belonged to her mother. The quilt folded at the foot of the bed that still smelled faintly of Walter, though perhaps that was only her imagination now. All of it stayed, as if someone might return and need these things, as if the house itself might remember who had lived here, even if no one else would. 40 minutes passed. Evelyn stood in the living room one last time. The light came through the window the way it always did in late morning, casting long rectangles across the hardwood floor. She had stood in this exact spot thousands of times, watching her son play with blocks on the carpet, watching Walter fall asleep in his chair with a book open on his chest, watching the years pass through this room like light through water. Now the room watched her back, silent, already forgetting. At the door, she paused, not to cry, not to beg, just to remember how it felt to stand inside this house and belong. Then she stepped out and closed the door behind her. The sound was small, clean, final. The three of them stood on the walkway, speaking around her as if she had already gone. The woman in heels signed something on a clipboard. One of the men produced a key from his pocket and turned toward the door. She didn't contest it, one of them asked quietly, thinking perhaps that Evelyn couldn't hear, or perhaps not caring. Didn't respond, the other said. Happens more than you think. Evelyn almost smiled at that. Happens more than you think. 4 words that contained an entire world of silence. All the others like her. The widows and widowers who didn't understand the paperwork. The elderly who signed things they shouldn't have signed, or didn't sign things they should have. The people who fell through the cracks of a system designed by people who had never experienced falling. She turned and walked away before they could say anything else. Behind her, she heard the door open again, heard their footsteps in her hallway, heard their voices in her kitchen. She did not look back. The bus station smelled like old paper and stale coffee and something else that Evelyn couldn't quite name. Exhaustion, perhaps. The particular scent of people who had been sitting too long in places they didn't want to be. The lights hummed overhead. Fluorescent. Too bright for sleep. Too cold for comfort. Evelyn sat on a metal bench with her suitcase tucked between her feet, as if someone might take even that, if she let it out of sight. The leather was cool against her ankles, solid. The only familiar thing in a world that had become suddenly completely foreign. Across from her, a man lay stretched across 3 seats, his coat pulled over his face like a blanket. He was perhaps 60, maybe older, with work-worn hands that hung off the edge of the bench. The kind of hands that had built things once, fixed things. Hands that knew the weight of tools and the satisfaction of a job done right. Near the vending machine, a woman counted coins in her palm. Once, twice. Her lips moved silently as she calculated. Then she closed her fist, slipped the coins back into her pocket, and walked away with nothing. No one asked questions here. That was the rule. Evelyn understood it immediately, the way you understand the rules of a place the moment you enter it. Don't make eye contact too long. Don't ask where someone came from. Don't expect kindness, but don't be surprised by it either. She kept her hands folded in her lap, her posture straight, as if she were still waiting in a place where dignity mattered. Perhaps it still did. Perhaps that was all she had left. A voice broke the silence. First night. Evelyn turned her head slightly. The man across from her had pushed his coat back just enough to look at her. His eyes were tired but clear. Not curious, just certain. Yes, Evelyn said. The word came out smaller than she intended. He nodded once, as if that confirmed something he already knew. Name's Silas, he said. Don't sleep too deep. They come through around 3. Evelyn blinked. Security. Silas continued. Sometimes worse. Worse. He pulled the coat back over his face. People who know you're new. The words settled heavier than the air. Evelyn looked down at her hands. They were clean. still steady, still hers. But for the first time, they did not seem to belong anywhere. The hours passed the way hours pass, when you have nowhere to be and nothing to wait for. Slowly, heavily, like water seeping through sand. Around 11, the woman from the vending machine sat down a few seats away. She was younger than Evelyn had first thought, perhaps 50, early 50s. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and she wore a jacket that had seen better winters. She didn't say anything at first, just sat there, a plastic bag looped around her wrist like an anchor. Then, without looking at Evelyn, she spoke. "You waiting for someone?" It wasn't really a question. "No," Evelyn said. The woman nodded. Her eyes stayed fixed on some point across the station. "I'm Meredith," she said. "Used to be a secretary. 23 years at the same firm. Then they moved everything overseas. Computers, you know." Evelyn didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. Meredith glanced at her briefly. "You don't look like you belong here." Evelyn almost smiled. "I used to belong somewhere," she said, quietly. "Yeah," Meredith replied. "We all did." A beat passed. The station clock ticked forward. Somewhere outside, a bus engine rumbled to life and then faded into the distance. "Family?" Meredith asked. Evelyn looked straight ahead. "I had one." Meredith nodded as if that was answer enough. It usually was. Sometimes, the woman said after a moment, it's not losing the house that gets you. Evelyn turned slightly. It's realizing no one's coming to get you back. The words didn't break her. They just fit. Like a key sliding into a lock she hadn't known was there. She didn't sleep. Not really. Her eyes closed. But her mind kept walking through the house she had left behind. The hallway. The kitchen window that stuck in winter. The faint mark on the wall where Walter had once missed a nail trying to hang a picture she had picked out. He had laughed at himself, called himself a hazard to interior decorating. She had kissed his cheek and told him she would love him even if he put holes in every wall they ever owned. Not memories. Coordinates. Proof that she had existed somewhere. Around 2 in the morning, she opened her eyes again. The lights hadn't changed. The people hadn't moved much. Time here didn't pass. It lingered, like a guest that had overstayed but had nowhere else to go. Evelyn reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the envelope she had grabbed before leaving the records office earlier that day. She hadn't planned to go there, but something had pulled her in that direction. Some instinct. Some refusal to accept that this was the end of the road. The envelope contained a single sheet of paper. An address. A property listing that had been flagged as residual holdings, whatever that meant. She didn't open it now, not yet, because once she did, it would be real. And if it was real, it meant this. This bench. This place. This night. It was no longer temporary. It was the space between 2 lives. Around 3 footsteps echoed down the corridor. Heavy. Deliberate. The security guard moved through slowly, flashlights sweeping left and right. Not really looking at anyone. Just making sure no one was causing trouble. Making sure the unhoused stayed quiet. Invisible. Evelyn sat perfectly still. Eyes forward. Hands folded. The guard passed without stopping. Silas had been right. By the time the sky outside began to pale, Evelyn had made her decision. Not because she believed in the address on that paper. Not because she had hope. But because she couldn't stay in a place where nothing moved forward. She stood slowly, joints stiff, dignity intact. Silas lowered his coat again. His eyes found hers. Heading out. Yes. Got somewhere to go. Evelyn held up the folded paper. I have an address. He studied her for a long moment. Then he gave a small nod. That's more than most. She adjusted her grip on the suitcase. It's probably nothing, she said. He shrugged. Nothing's still better than this. Evelyn looked around one last time. Not at the people. At the space. The quiet understanding. The absence of expectation. The way everyone here had learned to exist without being seen. Then she said something she didn't fully understand until it left her lips. This might be the worst decision I could make. Silas raised an eyebrow. Evelyn gave a faint, almost invisible smile. And the only one I have left. Outside, the morning air was colder than she expected. The world looked the same. Cars passed. People walked with purpose. Coffee shops opened their doors like nothing had shifted. A man in a gray suit talked loudly into his phone about quarterly projections. A young mother pushed a stroller past without making eye contact. The sun rose over the harbor the way it rose every morning, indifferent to who was watching and who was not. But Evelyn knew better. Everything had shifted. She stepped onto the sidewalk, the folded paper now open in her hand. An address. A place called Rockport, about 40 miles up the coast. A villa, the clerk had called it. Technically. She looked at the address for a long moment. Then she folded it carefully and placed it back in her pocket. Not with hope. Not yet. But with something steadier. A quiet refusal to disappear. And then, without looking back, Evelyn Mercer began walking toward the only place left that hadn't already decided who she was. The county records office opened at 8:30. Evelyn arrived at 8:15. She had walked a mile and a half from the bus station, suitcase rolling behind her, the morning chill pressing against her face like a question she wasn't ready to answer. The building was old, red brick, white trim, the kind of municipal architecture that had been built in the 1940s and never quite updated since. Inside it smelled like paper and time. File cabinets lined the walls like soldiers standing at attention. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with the particular frequency of government buildings everywhere. A young man sat behind the front desk, late 20s. Dark hair slightly disheveled. Wire-rimmed glasses that kept sliding down his nose. His name tag read Nathaniel Burroughs, and he had the look of someone who had taken this job because he believed in public service and was slowly learning that public service often meant watching people fall through cracks you couldn't close. "Can I help you?" he asked. Evelyn set her suitcase beside the chair and lowered herself into it. "I hope so," she said. She explained the situation. The house. The eviction. The estate adjustment she didn't understand. She spoke calmly, without self-pity, without asking for sympathy. Just the facts. The sequence of events that had led her from a home of 42 years to a bench in a bus station to this chair in front of a young man who probably had the power to help her or the power to send her away. Nathaniel listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't look at his computer, didn't check his phone. He just listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said. Not in the way the woman at her door had said it, in a way that actually sounded like he meant it. Then he stood up. "Let me check something." He disappeared into a back room. Evelyn heard the sound of file cabinets opening and closing, papers shuffling, the quiet murmur of bureaucracy doing what bureaucracy did. 10 minutes passed. 15. Then Nathaniel returned. He was holding a thin file folder. His expression had changed. There was something there now. Uncertainty, maybe. Or curiosity. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, sitting back down. "I think there's something you should see." She looked at him steadily. "I don't believe there's anything left to see," she said. He hesitated. Then he slid the file across the desk. "This wasn't included in the main transfer," he said. "It's listed under residual holdings. Probably an oversight." Evelyn didn't touch it at first. "What is it?" He glanced at the file, then back at her. "A property. Coastal. It's..." He paused, searching for the right word. "Unclaimed." She let out a quiet breath. "Unwanted, you mean?" He didn't correct her. "They couldn't sell it," he said instead. "It's been sitting there for years. Structurally unsound according to the last assessment. Off the active registry." Evelyn finally placed her hand on the file. The paper was thin, almost weightless. "A house?" she asked. "A villa," Nathaniel said. "Technically." She let the words sit between them. Villa. It sounded too grand for something nobody wanted. Why wasn't it included in the estate, she asked. Nathaniel gave a small, uncertain shrug. No one claimed it, and no one asked. "It appears it belonged to a distant relative of your husband. Third cousin, maybe. The connection was severed decades ago, but legally it passed to your husband when the previous owner died without heirs. And now," he trailed off, "now it passes to me." Evelyn finished. He nodded slowly. "If you want it." Evelyn opened the file. A single page. An address. A faded photograph of a large, weather-worn structure perched at the edge of a cliff, facing the sea. Beautiful once. Forgotten now. The windows were clouded. The wood along the frames had darkened with age. A long balcony stretched across the front like an outstretched arm, but the railing leaned slightly, as if tired of holding itself up. "People don't stay there," Nathaniel added, almost casually. Evelyn looked up at him. "Why not?" He shifted in his seat. "I'm not sure. The reports are vague. Previous occupants left quickly. Most didn't give reasons. A few mentioned that the place felt..." He stopped. Felt what Evelyn asked. He met her eyes. Wrong. The word came out reluctantly, like a confession he hadn't meant to make. Evelyn looked back at the photograph, at the house that no one wanted, at the windows that seemed to stare back at her from across decades of neglect. Then she closed the file. "How do I get there?" she asked. Nathaniel blinked. "Mrs. Mercer, I'm not sure you understand. This property is remote. It's isolated. The road doesn't even go all the way. And if the structural reports are accurate, I understand," Evelyn said. She stood up, lifting her suitcase with one hand and the thin document with the other. For the first time that day, her voice carried something different. Not hope, not yet, but direction. "It hasn't had the chance to ask me to leave." She nodded once at Nathaniel. "Thank you," she said, "for looking." Then Evelyn Mercer walked out of the county records office and toward the only place left in the world that hadn't already decided she didn't belong. The bus ride to Rockport took just over an hour. Evelyn sat by the window watching the Maine coastline unroll beside her like a painting she had seen before, but never really looked at. Rocky shores, pine trees standing straight against the gray sky. Small towns with white churches and harbor docks where fishing boats rocked gently in the morning tide. She had lived in Maine her whole life, but she realized now that she had stopped seeing it years ago. The familiar had become invisible. The beautiful had become ordinary. Perhaps that was what loss did. It made you see things again. The bus was mostly empty. A young woman with headphones sat near the front, nodding to music only she could hear. An elderly man in a flannel jacket dozed 3 rows back, his chin resting on his chest. The driver was a heavy-set woman with kind eyes who had nodded at Evelyn when she boarded, but hadn't asked any questions. No one asked questions on buses like this. That was another unspoken rule. The road narrowed as they headed north. The towns grew smaller. The spaces between them grew longer. Eventually, the bus turned off the main highway onto a 2-lane road that wound along the cliffs like a ribbon draped carelessly over stone. Evelyn checked the address again, compared it to the mile markers outside the window. They were getting close. 20 minutes later, the bus slowed. The driver glanced at Evelyn through the mirror. "This is as far as I go," she said. Evelyn looked out the window. There was nothing here. No houses, no shops. Just a narrow road bending toward the sound of the ocean, somewhere out of sight. A wooden signpost pointed toward something called Widow's Point, but the paint had faded too much to read the distance. "The address continues," Evelyn said. The driver shrugged. "Road doesn't." A few passengers glanced at her, then quickly away. No one offered help. No one asked questions. Evelyn nodded once. "Thank you." She stood, pulled her suitcase from the overhead compartment, and stepped off the bus. The doors hissed shut behind her. Within seconds, the bus was gone, disappearing around a curve in the road like a memory already fading. Silence took its place. Not peaceful silence, the kind that waits. The walk was not long, but it felt longer than anything Evelyn had done in years. The road turned to gravel, then to packed dirt, then to something that was barely a path at all. Her suitcase wheels caught on rocks and roots. Her shoes, practical flats that had served her well for a decade, began to show their age against the uneven ground. The wind grew stronger the closer she got to the coast. It pulled at her coat, tangled her hair. pressed against her chest as if testing whether she meant to continue. She did. Around the final bend, the land opened up, and there it was. The villa stood at the edge of a low cliff, facing the open sea, like it had been placed there on purpose and then forgotten. The Atlantic stretched beyond it, gray and endless waves crashing against the rocks below, with a rhythm that sounded almost like breathing. Once the house must have been beautiful. Tall windows lined the front facade. Wide stone steps led up to a heavy wooden door. A long balcony stretched across the second floor like an outstretched arm, and Evelyn could imagine someone standing there decades ago, watching ships pass on the horizon. Now the windows were clouded with salt and age. The wood along the frames had darkened, warped in places. The railing on the balcony leaned slightly, as if tired of holding itself up. Vines climbed the eastern wall, and the garden that must have once existed had long since surrendered to wild grass and coastal weeds. But the structure stood. Evelyn stopped walking, not because she was afraid, because she understood something immediately. No one had come here in a very long time, and no one had come back. "You're not planning on going in there, are you?" The voice came from behind her. Evelyn turned to see an older man standing near a rusted fence a short distance away. He was perhaps 70, weathered face hands shoved into the pockets of a coat that had seen too many winters. His eyes were steady, unreadable. "I believe I am," Evelyn said. He let out a short breath, almost a laugh. "People don't stay there," he said. Evelyn glanced back at the house. "So I've heard." The man took a step closer. "Name's Garrett. Lived down the shore my whole life. Seen plenty of folks try that place." Evelyn waited. "They say it's unstable," Garrett continued. "Structure's off, doors swell, windows jam. Things don't sit right." "Things rarely do," Evelyn replied. He studied her more closely now. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Or respect. "You alone?" he asked. "Yes." He nodded slowly, as if that answered more than she had said. "Then listen carefully," he said. His voice dropped slightly. Not threatening. Warning. "If you go in there, don't expect it to feel empty." Evelyn met his gaze. "What does that mean?" Garrett hesitated. Then he shook his head. "It means no one who's tried to live there stayed long enough to explain it." A pause stretched between them. The wind moved through the grass. The sea continued its endless conversation with the rocks below. "Suit yourself," Garrett muttered, turning away. "Just don't say no one warned you." Evelyn watched him walk down the path toward wherever he had come from. He didn't look back. She turned toward the villa. The front steps creaked under her weight, though they held. The wood was gray with age, but solid beneath the decay. She climbed slowly, suitcase bumping against each step, until she stood before the door. It was heavier than she expected. Oak, maybe. Or something older. The handle was brass tarnished green with salt air and time. She rested her hand against the wood. 42 years in one home. Now this. No ceremony. No welcome. Just a threshold. Evelyn turned the handle. It opened without resistance. The air inside was still, not stale, not damp, just untouched, as if the house had been holding its breath. Evelyn stepped inside slowly. Her shoes echoed softly against the wooden floor. Dust lay across most surfaces, but not evenly. Some areas were thick with it, others almost clean, as if time had passed around them instead of through them. The main room stretched wide with a high ceiling and a large window facing the ocean. The light filtered in pale and steady, illuminating more absence than presence. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, cold and unused, but somehow not abandoned. A wooden table stood in the center of the room, and near the window a single chair. The chair was angled toward the sea, not crooked, not shifted, placed. Evelyn set her suitcase down near the wall. The sound seemed deliberate. She couldn't explain why. Her eyes moved across the room. The chair by the window, the table in the center, the way the dust lay differently in different places. She stepped closer to the table, ran her fingers lightly across the surface. Dust, except for one spot, a single circle in the center. Clean, as if something had once rested there and been lifted away without disturbing anything else. Evelyn frowned. Behind her, a window creaked softly. She turned. The window near the fireplace had opened, slightly, just enough for the wind to slip through. She stared at it, then at the frame. No rot, no warping, no reason for it to have moved. But it had. Evelyn stood very still. The house around her remained silent. But it was not the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of attention. She walked slowly through the room again, this time not as someone entering a ruin, as someone being observed. She stopped in the center of the floor, listened. Nothing. And yet, not empty. "Who lived here?" she asked quietly. The words fell into the space and stayed there. The house did not answer, but it didn't ignore her either. Evelyn exhaled slowly. Then she nodded to herself. "This wasn't abandoned," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Her eyes moved once more across the room. The chair, the table, the window, the circle of clean wood where something had been. It was left waiting. For the first time since she had lost everything, Evelyn Mercer was not standing in a place that rejected her. She was standing in a place that hadn't decided yet. And somewhere in the walls, in the wood, in the silence that pressed against her like a held breath, something had noticed that she was still here, that she had not run, that she had chosen to stay. The light shifted slightly. The window settled. The dust continued to lie where it had lain for years. But Evelyn felt it, a change, small, almost imperceptible, like a door that had been locked for decades turning 1 degree closer to open. The first thing Evelyn learned about the villa was this: it responded to patience, not force, not fear. Patience. She did not sleep much that first night, not because she was afraid, but because the house did not feel like something you could ignore. She had found a bedroom on the second floor. Simple. A bed with a mattress that smelled faintly of cedar, as if someone had placed sachets in the drawers decades ago, and they had never quite faded. A window that faced the sea. A dresser with a mirror so clouded with age that her reflection looked like a ghost of herself. Perhaps that was fitting. She lay awake, listening to the sounds of the villa settling around her. The wind moved through it in soft, measured breaths. Floorboards shifted, not sharply. Not the way old houses creak and groan, subtly, like a structure adjusting itself instead of breaking down, like something breathing. Around 3 in the morning, Evelyn gave up on sleep and walked downstairs. The main room was silver with moonlight. The sea beyond the window was black endless, dotted with the faint lights of distant ships that moved so slowly. They seemed to be standing still. She stood at the window for a long time watching them, wondering where they were going, wondering if anyone on those ships ever thought about the people on shore looking out at them from houses that no one else wanted. Probably not. The chair by the window seemed to wait for her. She sat. It felt natural. That bothered her more than anything else. "You don't belong to me," she said quietly into the dim room. The words sounded firm, but not convincing. Morning came slowly. A pale line of light stretched across the floor, moving inch by inch as the sun rose over the Atlantic. Evelyn watched it from the chair. Her hands rested calmly in her lap. Her eyes followed the light as it traveled across the worn wood, illuminating dust motes that floated in the air like tiny planets orbiting nothing. Then something caught her attention. The light did not spread randomly. It narrowed, focused, until it rested on a single section of the far wall, a precise rectangle, clean, undisturbed. Evelyn frowned slightly. "That's not chance," she murmured. She stood. Her joints protested. 75 years of living had accumulated in her knees and hips like sediment. But she moved steadily toward the wall. It looked like the rest. Aged wood, slightly warped in places. Nothing remarkable, but the light held there, as if pointing. Evelyn hesitated for only a moment. Then she reached out and pressed her fingers gently against the surface. Nothing. She applied a little more pressure. Still nothing. She exhaled. "Of course," she whispered. "Why would it be that simple?" She stepped back, looked again. The light, the angle, the chair. Evelyn turned slowly and walked back to the chair. She sat down, waited, watched. The light shifted again, just slightly. This time it aligned not just with the wall, but with her. Her position. A quiet realization settled in. "This house," she said under her breath, "doesn't react to movement." She stood again, more carefully this time, moved one step to the left. The light shifted. One step to the right. It followed. Not randomly. Not fully. Just enough to suggest adjustment. Evelyn looked back at the wall, then at the chair. Then, slowly, deliberately, she returned to the exact position she had been sitting in before. The light aligned again. Perfectly. She did not rush this time. She walked back to the wall and placed her hand where the light met the wood. Then, instead of pushing, she rested her palm flat against the surface and waited. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, a soft click, so faint she almost missed it. Evelyn's breath caught. The wood beneath her hand shifted, slightly, not opening, not breaking, releasing. A narrow seam appeared along the panel, not visible before, not forced, revealed. Evelyn stepped back, her eyes fixed on the thin line now tracing part of the wall. "That wasn't there," she whispered. Carefully, she reached out again. This time, she followed the seam with her fingers. The wood was cool beneath her touch, smooth, as if it had been waiting for exactly this. A small section of the panel gave way, opening just enough to reveal a shallow compartment hidden inside. No dust, no decay, preserved. Inside was a single object, a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age but untouched by the wear surrounding it. Evelyn did not grab it immediately. She stared at it as if it might disappear if she moved too quickly. "Someone wanted this found," she said quietly. "Not hidden, not buried. Found." She reached in and lifted the paper with careful hands. It felt fragile, important, like something that had been waiting longer than she had. She unfolded it slowly. No name, no date, just a single line written in steady, deliberate handwriting. "If you are here, then you already understand more than the others." Evelyn read it twice, then a third time. Her chest tightened, not with fear, with something deeper. Recognition. The others, she repeated softly. Her eyes moved back to the wall, to the chair, to the path of the light. "They tried to open it," she said. Her voice was barely audible now. "Didn't they?" She folded the paper again, more carefully than before. For the first time since she had stepped into the villa, her expression changed. Not confusion, not doubt. Something steadier. "This wasn't left behind," she said quietly. Her gaze lifted, scanning the room with new awareness. It was left for someone who would stay long enough to notice. The house remained silent, but it no longer felt uncertain. It felt selective. And Evelyn Mercer, standing alone in a place no one else would choose, had just become the first person to be acknowledged. By the second morning, Evelyn stopped asking whether the house was strange. The better question was, what did it expect from her? She stood in the center of the main room. The folded note rested in her palm. The words echoed in her mind. "If you are here, then you already understand more than the others. I don't," she said aloud. Her voice was steady, but honest. Not yet. The house offered no correction, only quiet. Evelyn began with something simple. She cleaned, not out of habit, out of intention. She moved slowly, deliberately, as if each action mattered, because perhaps it did. Dust came away in soft gray clouds, revealing wood that had not rotted so much as waited. The table first. She wiped it evenly, stopping when she reached the circle that had already been clean. She did not disturb it. "Some things aren't meant to be corrected," she murmured. Then, in the chair, she adjusted it without thinking, just slightly, aligning it more precisely with the window. The moment she let go, a faint shift moved through the room. Not sound, not movement. A presence recalibrating. Evelyn stilled. "You notice that," she said quietly. She turned toward the window. It was half open again, not blown wide by the wind, not rattling, placed. The curtain moved in a slow, controlled rhythm, as if the air itself had boundaries. Evelyn stepped closer. "You open when I don't touch you," she said, studying the frame, but not fully. She reached out and opened the window the rest of the way. The wind rushed in, harder now, sharper, less measured. The curtains snapped against the frame. The room felt wrong. Evelyn frowned. Then slowly she closed the window back to where it had been. The air softened. The curtains settled. The room exhaled. She stepped back. "This isn't broken," she said. "It's specific." The realization did not frighten her. It steadied her. For the first time in months, maybe longer, Evelyn was not reacting to something being taken away. She was learning something that revealed itself only if she paid attention. She returned to the wall panel and opened the hidden compartment again. Inside, beneath where the note had rested, she noticed something she had not seen before. A thin metal strip embedded into the back of the compartment. Not visible at first glance, not decorative, functional. Evelyn leaned closer. There were markings, faint, almost worn away. Measurements, she whispered. Angles. A system. Not a hidden room. Not a single secret. A structure designed to respond. She stepped back and turned slowly, taking in the entire room again. The chair, the table, the window, the angle of the light. Each one placed with purpose, not randomly arranged, connected. "Who built this?" she asked quietly. Her voice did not echo. It settled. Evelyn walked to the far side of the room and paused near the fireplace. Cold, unused, but clean. Too clean. She crouched slightly, brushing her fingers along the edge of the stone. No ash, no residue. But the stone beneath her hand felt warmer than it should. She pulled back, startled, not in fear, in surprise. "That's not possible," she said under her breath. She sat back in the chair, slower this time, thinking, not reacting. "This house doesn't watch," she said after a long moment. Her voice was calm now, certain. It responds. The difference mattered. Watching was observation. Responding was relationship. Evelyn leaned forward, resting her elbows lightly on her knees. "You're not waiting for someone to find you," she said. Her eyes moved across the room. Sharper now, more focused. "You're waiting for someone to live the right way inside you." A faint sound followed. A soft, almost imperceptible shift near the wall behind her. Evelyn turned her head. Another panel, smaller this time, had moved just enough to reveal a dark edge beneath it. She did not rush toward it. She did not even stand. She just watched. A slow breath left her lips. "All right," she said quietly. Not afraid. Not overwhelmed. Acknowledged. And somewhere within the structure of wood and silence, something had shifted. Not because she had forced it open, but because she had finally begun to understand how to stay. On the fourth morning, the black SUV arrived. Evelyn heard it before she saw it. The engine sound was wrong for this place. Too smooth. Too expensive. The kind of vehicle that belonged on city streets, not on coastal roads that barely existed. She stood by the window. The same window. The same position. The SUV came to a stop just short of the front steps. For a long moment, nothing happened. The engine idled. The windows were dark. Then the driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He was perhaps 55, maybe 60. Tall. Silver hair cut short and precise. He wore a gray suit that probably cost more than everything Evelyn had ever owned. And he moved with the particular confidence of someone who had never been told no in a way that mattered. He did not look at the house with curiosity. He looked at it with recognition. Evelyn opened the door before he reached it. That unsettled him. Just barely. A flicker in his eyes. A slight pause in his step. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, offering a polite nod. "I was hoping we wouldn't have to introduce ourselves under these circumstances." Evelyn held his gaze. "You've already introduced yourself," she said. "Have I?" "You came without knocking." The politeness did not leave his face, but something behind it shifted. "I'm Douglas Kincaid," he said. He extended his hand. Evelyn did not take it. He lowered it without comment. "I represent a private acquisition group," he continued. "We've been monitoring this property for some time." "Then you're late," Evelyn replied. A brief pause. The wind moved through the grass behind him. "We'd like to make you an offer," Kincaid said. His voice remained smooth, professional. The voice of a man who had made this speech many times before. "You already made one," Evelyn said calmly. He raised an eyebrow. "Have we?" "The clerk," Evelyn said. The silence. The fact that no one claimed this place until I did. Kincaid's eyes sharpened. Just slightly. But enough. She wasn't guessing. "May we come in?" he asked. No. The answer was immediate. Not defensive. Final. Kincaid exhaled slowly, then nodded once. "Very well," he said. "Then I'll be direct." He reached into his coat and pulled out a thin folder. Clean. Precise. Like everything else about him. "We're prepared to compensate you generously for the property," he said. "More than its current condition would suggest." Evelyn glanced at the folder, then back at him. "You're not buying the house," she said. He tilted his head slightly. "No. You're buying what's inside it." Silence. The kind that does not deny, only recalculates. Kincaid's expression shifted, just enough to confirm it. "We're buying the property," he said carefully. Evelyn shook her head slowly. "You didn't come here for broken wood and sea air." Her voice remained calm, but there was something sharper beneath it now. "You came because something was hidden here, and now you think I found it." The wind moved between them. Kincaid closed the folder slowly. "Let me be clear," he said, his tone softer now, but firmer. "This property has a complicated history. There are legal uncertainties." "I've read them," Evelyn replied. Another shift, subtle, but real. You shouldn't involve yourself in matters you don't fully understand, Kincaid said. Evelyn held his gaze without blinking. I understand enough to know. Someone erased it, she said. And I understand even more now that you're here. A long pause stretched between them. Kincaid took a step closer. Not onto the porch, but near enough to lower his voice. What you found in there, he said quietly, doesn't belong to you. Evelyn did not move. It didn't belong to them either, she replied. Another pause, longer this time. Then Kincaid straightened. I have nowhere else to go, Evelyn said, before he could speak. That's the only reason I'm here. Kincaid studied her. Everyone has somewhere to go, he said. It's just a matter of price. Evelyn almost smiled. Then I suppose I'm not everyone. Kincaid did not respond, because there was nothing left to adjust. He turned and walked back to the SUV without another word. The door closed. The engine started. And Evelyn watched the vehicle disappear down the coastal road like a threat that had not yet finished arriving. They did not wait long. On the fifth morning, the power went out. Evelyn discovered it when she tried to turn on the lamp in the bedroom. Nothing happened. She checked the kitchen. The old refrigerator had gone silent. The clock on the wall had stopped at 3:17. She walked outside and looked at the power lines that ran along the road. They were intact. This was not an accident. On the sixth morning, the water stopped. The faucet coughed once, twice. Then, nothing. The pipes groaned with emptiness. Evelyn stood at the sink for a long moment. Then she walked outside, found an old rain barrel near the back of the house, and began collecting what remained from the morning dew. On the seventh morning, a car appeared at the end of the road. It did not approach. It simply sat there, watching. Evelyn did not acknowledge it. She had found canned food in the cellar, beans, vegetables preserved in glass jars that someone had left decades ago. They were still sealed, still good. She ate slowly, rationed carefully, kept her strength, and she continued to learn the house. The villa responded to her presence in ways she was still discovering. A door that had been stuck suddenly opened when she stood in the right place. A drawer that had seemed empty revealed a false bottom when the afternoon light hit it at a certain angle. Each discovery felt earned, not given. On the eighth day, Douglas Kincaid returned. He came alone this time. No SUV, just a rental car that looked ordinary enough to belong anywhere. He stood on the front steps. He did not try to enter. Mrs. Mercer, he said, you're still here. Evelyn opened the door but did not step outside. Where else would I be? She said. You know what we can offer, he said. More than enough to start over. A real home. Running water. Heat. Evelyn looked at him. You cut the power, she said. You cut the water. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you do. He did not deny it. I'm trying to help you, he said instead. This doesn't have to be difficult. Evelyn leaned slightly against the doorframe. Mr. Kincaid, she said. Her voice was tired but steady. I've lived 75 years. I've buried a husband. I've lost a home I lived in for 42 years. I've spent a night on a bus station bench wondering if anyone would notice if I simply stopped existing. She paused. This, she said, is not difficult. This is what happens when you run out of easier options. Kincaid was silent. Then he said something that changed everything. We've tried to open this house, he said quietly. For years. Decades. Evelyn did not move. People came. Kincaid continued. Specialists. Engineers. Men who knew how to find things that didn't want to be found. They searched every wall, every floor, every inch of this property. His voice dropped. Nothing. They found nothing. Because the house wouldn't let them. He looked at her with something that might have been frustration, or might have been wonder. You've been here a week, he said, and you've already found something. How do you know? Evelyn asked. Because you're still here, Kincaid replied. Anyone else would have left by now. Evelyn held his gaze. Maybe I'm just stubborn, she said. No, Kincaid said. You're something else. He took a step back. You're the first person this house has accepted, he said. In 50 years. Evelyn felt the weight of those words settle into her chest. Why, she asked. Kincaid shook his head. I don't know, he said. And that terrifies me more than anything you might find inside. He turned and walked back to his car. At the door, he paused. We're not going away, he said. You should understand that. Evelyn nodded. Neither am I. The car drove off, and Evelyn stood in the doorway of a house that had chosen her for reasons she did not yet understand. On the morning of the 8th day, Evelyn found the second compartment. She had been sitting in the chair by the window, watching the light, waiting, not for anything specific, just waiting in the way the house seemed to want. The floor beneath her creaked, not randomly, not from age. A pattern. Evelyn looked down. The wooden boards near her feet had shifted, just slightly. A gap had appeared between two planks that had seemed seamless before. She did not stand immediately. She had learned that much. Instead, she waited. The light moved across the floor. Slowly, deliberately, until it reached the gap and stopped. Now Evelyn stood. She knelt beside the gap and pressed her fingers against the edge of the board. It lifted easily, as if it had been waiting. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth that had protected it from moisture for decades, was a leather journal. Evelyn lifted it carefully. The leather was cracked but solid. The pages inside were yellowed but intact. She opened it. The handwriting was precise, measured. The writing of someone who had chosen each word deliberately. The first page contained a date. 18 years before Evelyn was born, and a name. Marcus Whitfield, architect. Evelyn turned the pages slowly. What she found made her breath catch. Diagrams, floor plans, measurements that did not match any building she had ever seen, and notes. The house must respond to presence, not force one entry read. It must recognize those who have lost everything and still choose to remain. Another entry dated 3 months later. They took the Henderson property today. The same method, the same forged signatures, the same lawyers who know exactly how much justice costs and how little most people can afford. And another, I cannot stop them, but I can preserve the evidence. I can build something they cannot open, something that waits for the right person. Evelyn turned more pages, lists of names, addresses, dates, properties that had been taken through fraud and legal manipulation, families that had been displaced, lives that had been erased by paperwork. Hundreds of them. Decades of theft, documented, preserved, hidden inside a house that would not reveal its secrets to those who came looking for them, only to those who had already lost. At the back of the journal, Evelyn found one final entry. If you are reading this then, and the house has done what I designed it to do, it has waited for someone who understands loss, someone who did not come here seeking treasure, or secrets or power, someone who came here because there was nowhere else to go. You are not a thief. You are a witness, and now you must decide what to do with what you have found. Evelyn closed the journal. Her hands were trembling, not with fear, with understanding. This was why the house had chosen her. Not because she was special, not because she was strong, because she had nothing left to lose. And that made her the only person who could be trusted with the truth. She sat in the chair for a long time. The journal rested on her lap. The sea moved beyond the window in its eternal rhythm. The light shifted across the floor and then faded as clouds rolled in from the north. Evelyn thought about Douglas Kincaid, his expensive suit, his careful words, his certainty that everything could be bought. She thought about the names in the journal, the families who had lost their homes the same way she had lost hers. She thought about her husband, about the house they had shared, about the life that had been taken from her with a thin envelope and a firm knock. And then she understood something else. The house had not just chosen her. It had been waiting for her all along. The words from the journal echoed in her mind. This house does not open for seekers. It opens for those who have lost everything and still choose to stay instead of run. Evelyn looked around the room, at the walls that held secrets, at the floors that shifted to reveal them, at the windows that opened and closed as if the house itself was breathing. You knew, she said quietly, didn't you? You knew I would come. The house did not answer, but somewhere in the silence, in the space between the walls and beneath the floors, something settled, something that felt like agreement. Evelyn stood. She walked to the window and looked out at the sea. They are going to come back, she said. Not a question, a certainty. They will offer more money, more threats, more pressure. They will try everything they can think of to make me leave. She paused. But I'm not leaving. Because this isn't just about me anymore. It's about all of them, all the names in that journal. All the families who lost everything and had no one to speak for them. All the people who fell through the cracks of a system designed by people who had never experienced falling. Evelyn turned from the window. Her eyes moved across the room, the chair, the table, the hidden compartments that had revealed themselves to her. There were more. She was certain of it. More secrets, more documents, more truth waiting to be found. And she had time. For the first time in months, Evelyn Mercer had something she had not had since before Walter died. Purpose. She sat back in the chair. The journal rested on the table beside her. Outside, the clouds continued to gather. A storm was coming in from the sea. But inside the villa, everything was still, waiting. And Evelyn waited with it, patient, ready. "The villa did not find me," she said softly. "It chose me. And I choose to stay." The storm arrived on the 10th morning. It came from the northeast, rolling across the Atlantic like something ancient and inevitable. The sky turned the color of bruised metal. The sea rose and fell in massive swells that crashed against the rocks below the cliff, with a sound like distant thunder. Evelyn stood at the window and watched it come. She had weathered storms before. 42 years in coastal Maine had taught her to read the sky, to know when to secure the shutters, and when to simply let the wind do what it would. This storm was not the worst she had seen, but it was the first she would face alone. The villa creaked around her, not in protest, in preparation. She had spent the previous day exploring the house more thoroughly. The journal had given her a map of sorts. Not a literal map, but an understanding. Marcus Whitfield had designed this place with intention. Every angle, every measurement, every seemingly random detail served a purpose. The house was a machine, a very old, very patient machine. And she was learning how to operate it. By noon, the rain had started. Heavy sheets that swept across the landscape like curtains being drawn. The power was still out. The water was still cut. But Evelyn had found candles in a drawer that opened only when the afternoon light hit it at a certain angle. She had collected enough rainwater to last a week. She had food. She had time. And she had the journal. She sat in the chair by the window, reading by the gray stormlight, turning pages that had waited decades to be read again. Marcus Whitfield had been a careful man, methodical. His notes were precise, his observations detailed. He had documented not just the fraud, but the system behind it. The lawyers who filed the paperwork, the judges who signed the orders, the companies that bought the seized properties for pennies and sold them for fortunes. A machine of displacement. That was what he called it. Evelyn read that phrase 3 times. A machine of displacement. She thought about her own house, the thin envelope, the firm knock, the 2 men who spoke in careful tones, the woman in heels who said she was sorry for Evelyn's loss. But the process still applied. The process. Always the process. She turned another page and stopped. There in Marcus Whitfield's precise handwriting was a list of properties, addresses, names, dates of acquisition. Her eyes moved down the page, and then she saw it. Not her house, not exactly, but the neighborhood, the street. Properties that surrounded the home she had lived in for 42 years. Evelyn's hands began to tremble. She turned more pages, faster now, more addresses, more names, a pattern emerging like a shape in fog. The properties were connected, not randomly, strategically. Someone had been buying up land in that area for decades, piece by piece, house by house, waiting for the right moment to complete the puzzle. And then Walter died, and Evelyn, grieving and confused, had not responded to the paperwork, and the process had applied. She closed the journal. For a long moment, she simply sat there. The storm raged outside. The rain beat against the windows like fists demanding entry. The sea crashed and roared. But inside, Evelyn was very still. "They didn't just take my house," she said quietly. "They planned it." Her voice was steady, but something beneath it had changed. She had thought she was a victim of bureaucracy, of bad timing, of her own failure to understand legal documents when grief had made everything incomprehensible. Now she understood something else. She had been targeted. They had waited for Walter to die. They had waited for her to be alone. And then they had taken everything she had left, not because of a process, because of a plan. Evelyn opened the journal again. This time she knew what she was looking for. The storm lasted 3 days. Evelyn used that time to search the house more thoroughly than she had before. The journal contained hints, references to other hiding places, documents that Marcus Whitfield had distributed throughout the villa like seeds waiting to sprout. She found a compartment behind the fireplace that contained property deeds going back to the 19th century. She found a hollow space beneath the stairs that held boxes of correspondence between lawyers and developers. She found a false panel in the bedroom closet that concealed photographs. Dozens of them. Families standing in front of houses they would soon lose. Children playing in yards that would be taken from them. Lives captured in the moment before everything changed. Each discovery brought her closer to understanding the full scope of what Marcus Whitfield had preserved. And each discovery made her more certain of what she had to do. On the 3rd day of the storm, as the wind finally began to ease, Evelyn found the entrance to the basement. She had known it existed. The journal had mentioned it. A final repository, Whitfield had called it. The most important documents, the most damning evidence, but he had not written how to access it, because the house would reveal it when the time was right, to the right person. Evelyn had spent hours searching, tapping walls, examining floors, looking for the seam, the gap, the hidden mechanism that would open the way. Nothing had worked. On the 3rd day, she stopped searching. She stood in the center of the main room, the same spot where she had stood on her first night in the villa, the same position from which she had first noticed that the house was not empty. She closed her eyes and waited. For a long time, nothing happened. The storm winds whispered around the house. The old wood settled and sighed. Somewhere a shutter creaked against its frame. Evelyn did not move. She thought about Walter, about the life they had built together, about the home they had made, about all the mornings she had stood in the kitchen watching him reach for his coffee mug, all the evenings they had sat together on the porch watching the sun go down. She thought about the night he died, the hospital room, the machines, the moment when his hand went slack in hers. She thought about the bus station, the metal bench, the cold fluorescent lights, Silas and Meredith, and all the others who had learned to exist without being seen. She thought about this house, this strange patient house that had waited 50 years for someone who would understand. And then she thought about the names in the journal, the families who had lost everything, the children in those photographs who had grown up without homes because someone had decided their land was worth more than their lives. She opened her eyes. "I understand," she said, quietly. The floor beneath her feet shifted. Not dramatically, not violently. Just a subtle release like a lock turning. Evelyn looked down. A section of the floor had moved, just slightly, just enough to reveal the edge of something beneath. She knelt slowly. Her fingers found the edge, lifted. A trapdoor. Stone steps descended into darkness. Evelyn did not hesitate. She had found candles. She had found matches. She had prepared for this without knowing she was preparing. She lit a candle. The flame flickered once, twice, then steadied. And she descended. The basement was not like the rest of the house. The villa above was wood and warmth, even in its abandonment. But this space had been carved directly into the foundation, into the rock of the cliff itself. Stone walls, a low ceiling, the smell of salt and age, and filing cabinets, rows of them, metal rusted at the edges but still intact, stretching back into the darkness like soldiers standing at attention. Evelyn moved forward. Her candle cast dancing shadows across the walls. The flame reflected in the metal surfaces, multiplying so that she seemed to walk through a corridor of small fires. She reached the first cabinet, pulled open a drawer. Files, dozens of them, each one labeled with a name, an address, a date. She opened one at random. A family named Morrison, a farm in the western part of the state, taken in 1962 through a fraudulent tax lien. Another file. The Hendersons, a house in Portland, seized after forged signatures appeared on a quit-claim deed in 1975. Another. The Castellanos, a small business property, lost when a manufactured code violation led to condemnation in 1983. Evelyn moved down the row, cabinet after cabinet, file after file, hundreds of cases, decades of theft. And at the far end of the basement, on a small table that had been placed there, as if waiting for this moment, she found a recording device, old, mechanical, a reel-to-reel tape recorder that must have been state-of-the-art when Marcus Whitfield placed it here. Evelyn sat down in the single chair beside the table. She pressed play. Static first. The hiss of aged tape, then a voice, male, calm, precise. The voice of a man who had chosen his words with the same care he had used to design his house. "If you are hearing this," Marcus Whitfield said, "then the house is chosen correctly." Evelyn listened. "I spent my life building things, houses, buildings, structures that would stand for generations. But the most important thing I ever built was this place, not because of its architecture, because of what it protects. A pause on the tape, the sound of breathing. They came to me in 1951. Men in expensive suits with legal documents and offers that seemed generous until you read the fine print. They wanted to buy land that had belonged to my family for 3 generations. I refused. So, they found another way. Evelyn sat very still. They forged documents, bribed officials, used every tool in their arsenal to take what they could not buy. It took them 5 years, but they succeeded. My family lost everything. Another pause. I could have given up. Many did. But I had skills they did not expect. I knew how to build, and I knew how to hide. The voice continued. I spent the next 40 years documenting their crimes. Every case I could find, every family they had destroyed, every property they had stolen. I gathered evidence that would have brought them down 100 times over. But evidence means nothing if no one believes you, if no one listens. So I built this house, and I hid everything inside it. And I waited. Evelyn heard something in the old man's voice now. Weariness, but also hope. I knew I would not live to see justice done. But I also knew that someday someone would find this place. Someone who had lost everything. Someone who understood. The tape crackled. If you are that person, then you have a choice to make. You can walk away. Sell this house. Take the money they will offer. Live out your days in comfort. No one would blame you. You have suffered enough. Or you can fight. You can take what I have preserved and bring it into the light. You can speak for all the families who could not speak for themselves. You can be the witness I could never be. A long pause. I cannot tell you which choice is right. That is not for me to decide. But I can tell you this. The house chose you for a reason. Trust it. The tape ended. Static filled the basement. Then silence. Evelyn sat in the chair for a long time. The candle burned low. The shadows grew longer. Above her, the storm had finally passed. She could hear the absence of wind, the settling of the house. She stood and began to carry the files upstairs. Douglas Kincaid arrived on the morning of the 11th day. He came alone. No SUV this time, just a single car, ordinary, unremarkable. He stood on the front steps. His suit was slightly less perfect than before. His face showed signs of sleeplessness. Evelyn opened the door. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, "you're still here. Where else would I be?" He did not smile. "May I come in?" he asked. No. A pause. Then he reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope. Thick. Heavy. He held it out to her. $2 million, he said. Plus a new apartment in Portland. Fully furnished. Paid for. And medical coverage for the rest of your life. Evelyn looked at the envelope, then back at him. "You've increased your offer," she said. "We've reconsidered the situation." "Have you?" Kincaid's expression did not change. "Mrs. Mercer, he said you've been here nearly 2 weeks now. You've lived without power, without running water. without any of the basic necessities that make life comfortable. I admire your determination. I truly do. But this doesn't have to continue. Evelyn studied him. You're afraid, she said, quietly. He blinked. Excuse me. You came here expecting to find an old woman who would take the first offer and disappear. Instead, you found someone who stayed. Someone the house accepted. And now you're afraid of what I might have found. Kincaid's jaw tightened. Mrs. Mercer, you've tried to buy this house for years, Evelyn continued. Sent specialists, engineers, men who knew how to find things. They found nothing, because the house wouldn't let them. Her voice was calm, steady, but it let me. Silence stretched between them. What do you want? Kincaid asked finally. Evelyn almost smiled. What do I want? She thought about the question, about all the possible answers. I want my husband back, she said. I want 42 years in a house that felt like home. I want to have understood those legal documents when they arrived. I want to have fought back before it was too late. She paused. But I can't have any of those things. Kincaid waited. What I can have, Evelyn said, is the truth. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a single photograph. One of the hundreds she had found in the basement. A family standing in front of a house. A young couple. 2 children. A dog. The Sullivan family, Evelyn said. Lost their home in 1978. Forged deed of sale. She held up another photograph. The Reardons, 1984. Fraudulent foreclosure. Another. The Marshalls, 1991. Manufactured code violations. She looked at Kincaid. Shall I continue? His face had gone pale. Where did you find those? He asked. The house showed me. Evelyn replied. Kincaid took a step back. You don't understand what you're dealing with, he said. The people behind this, the resources they have. You're one woman, one elderly woman alone in a house that should have been condemned years ago. He shook his head. They will destroy you. Evelyn nodded slowly. Maybe she said. She tucked the photographs back into her pocket. But they destroyed me once already. Took my home, my security, my sense that the world made some kind of sense. Her voice hardened. You don't get to destroy someone twice. Kincaid stared at her. What are you going to do? He asked. Evelyn met his gaze. I'm gonna stay, she said. I'm gonna keep reading those files. Keep documenting what I find. And when I'm ready, I'm gonna make sure every newspaper, every television station, every lawyer who still believes in justice knows exactly what was done. She paused. And then we'll see who gets destroyed. Kincaid was silent for a long moment. Then he laughed. Short. Bitter. You think it's that simple, he said. You think you can just expose decades of carefully hidden crimes and everything will be fine. That justice will prevail. That the good guys will win. He shook his head. This isn't a movie, Mrs. Mercer. This is the real world. And in the real world, people like you don't win. Evelyn looked at him. People like me, she repeated. Yes, people who have nothing. No money, no connections, no power. You're 75 years old. You have no family, no support, no resources. What do you think is going to happen? Evelyn considered the question. I don't know, she said honestly. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything I do will be ignored. Maybe the people behind this will continue to operate exactly as they have for decades. She stepped closer to him. But maybe not. Maybe one person reading one file will decide to dig deeper. Maybe one journalist will find the story too important to ignore. Maybe one lawyer will see a case worth fighting. She looked out at the sea beyond the cliff. I spent 42 years believing that if I did everything right, everything would be fine. Paid my taxes. Followed the rules. Trusted that the system would protect me. Her voice grew quieter. It didn't. She turned back to Kincaid. So now, I'm done trusting the system. I'm done believing that someone else will fix what's broken. I'm done waiting for justice to arrive on its own. Her eyes met his. If there's gonna be any justice at all, I'll have to make it myself. Kincaid stood very still. You're making a mistake, he said finally. Probably, Evelyn agreed. She gestured toward his car. But it's my mistake to make. And I've earned the right to make it. Kincaid looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked back to his car. At the door, he paused. This isn't over, he said. No, Evelyn replied. It isn't. But I'm not the one who should be worried about that. The car drove away, and Evelyn went back inside to continue her work. 3 days later, Nathaniel Burrows drove up to the villa. Evelyn had called him from a payphone in town. She had walked the 3 miles there and the 3 miles back. Her feet ached. Her legs protested. But she had made the call. Now he stood on her porch, the same young man who had found the overlooked file that led her here, looking at the boxes of documents she had carried up from the basement. Mrs. Mercer, he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. This is evidence, Evelyn said, of decades of property theft. Names, dates, methods. Everything documented by a man who spent 40 years gathering it. Nathaniel looked at her. Why me, he asked. Why call me? Evelyn considered the question. Because you looked, she said. When you could have just stamped my paperwork and sent me away, you looked. You found that overlooked file. You asked questions when you didn't have to. She paused. That tells me something about who you are. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. What do you want me to do with this? He asked. Evelyn gestured to the boxes. Copy everything she said. Send copies to the State Attorney General, to the FBI, to every newspaper in Maine, and keep a set for yourself somewhere safe, somewhere no one would think to look. She met his eyes. I'm 75 years old, she said. I don't know how much time I have left, but this evidence needs to survive whether I do or not. Nathaniel nodded slowly. It will take time, he said, To go through all of this, to verify it, to build a case. Evelyn smiled. Time, she said, is the one thing I seem to have plenty of. She helped him load the boxes into his car. It took 3 trips. By the time they were done, the sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Nathaniel stood by his car door. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, "I have to ask, aren't you afraid of what they might do?" Evelyn thought about the question. "I spent a night on a bus station bench," she said, "wondering if I would survive until morning, wondering if anyone would notice if I didn't." She looked at him. "I've been afraid of losing everything. Now that I have, there's nothing left to be afraid of." Nathaniel nodded. He seemed to understand. "I'll be in touch," he said. He drove away, and Evelyn went back inside. The months that followed were quiet. Not peaceful. Quiet. There was a difference. Evelyn stayed in the villa. The power was eventually restored. Someone from the county had shown up one day, apologetic, explaining that there had been a paperwork error. The water came back on a week later. She suspected Nathaniel's hand in both. The house continued to reveal itself to her slowly, patiently. Another compartment here. Another drawer there. More documents. More photographs. More pieces of a puzzle that was decades in the making. She read. She organized. She documented. And she waited. Word began to spread. First, a small article in a local newspaper. Then a longer piece in the state's largest daily. Then inquiries from journalists in Boston and New York. Phone calls from lawyers. Letters from families who had seen the articles and recognized their own stories in the documented cases. The machine of displacement, it seemed, had affected more people than anyone had realized. Douglas Kincaid did not return, but Evelyn knew he was watching. She could feel it sometimes, that sense of being observed. Cars that passed too slowly on the coastal road. Figures that lingered too long in the distance. They were waiting. For what she did not know. But she waited too. Spring came. The villa, which had seemed so foreboding in the winter storms, transformed into something almost welcoming. Wildflowers bloomed in the overgrown garden. Birds nested in the eaves. The sea, which had been gray and angry, turned blue and calm. Evelyn found herself walking to the cliff's edge each morning, watching the sun rise over the water. She thought about Walter, about the life they had shared, about the home they had lost. The grief was still there. It would always be there, but it no longer defined her. One afternoon in late April, Evelyn heard a sound she had not heard in months. A knock at the door. She rose from her chair by the window and walked slowly to the entrance. Through the clouded glass, she could see a figure. A woman, older, carrying a single bag. Evelyn opened the door. The woman who stood there was perhaps 68. Silver hair pulled back in a loose bun. Clothes that were clean but worn. Eyes that held the particular weariness of someone who had been walking for a very long time. "I'm sorry," the woman said quickly. Her voice was thin, uncertain. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I just..." She trailed off, looked down at the bag in her hands, looked back at Evelyn. "I just needed somewhere to sit for a while." Evelyn studied her. She saw the fatigue, the fear, the desperate dignity of someone trying to hold themselves together when everything had fallen apart. She recognized it. She had worn that same expression 3 months ago. "What's your name?" Evelyn asked. "Dorothea," the woman replied. "Dorothea Finch." "What happened, Dorothea?" The woman's composure cracked. "Just slightly. Just for a moment. They took my house," she said. "My husband passed last year and there was paperwork and I didn't understand," and her voice broke. "They just took it." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Come inside," she said. Dorothea blinked. "I don't have anything to give you," she said. "I can't pay." "You don't need to," Evelyn replied. She stepped back, opening the door wider. "This house doesn't ask for payment." Dorothea hesitated. Her eyes moved past Evelyn into the dim interior of the villa. The worn wooden floors, the windows facing the sea, the chair by the window where Evelyn had spent so many hours learning how to stay. "I don't understand," Dorothea whispered. Evelyn smiled. "You don't need to," she said. "Not yet." She gestured for the woman to enter. "Just one thing," she added. Dorothea paused on the threshold. "Don't rush it," Evelyn said. "Don't try to force anything. Don't expect the house to reveal itself immediately." Her eyes met Dorothea's. "It takes time," she said quietly, "to understand a place like this, to earn its trust." She looked back at the room behind her, at the walls that held secrets, at the floors that shifted to reveal them, at the hidden compartments and concealed passages and all the truth that had been preserved for so long. "But it's worth waiting for," she said. Dorothea stepped inside. The door closed behind her, and Evelyn Mercer, who had lost everything 3 months ago, led the first of many toward a place of shelter. The villa by the sea had been built to wait. 50 years it had stood there, patient and silent, holding its secrets close, while the world forgot it existed. 50 years of storms and salt, and the endless conversation between the waves and the rocks. It had waited for someone who would understand. And now it had found her. Not a hero, not a saint, just an ordinary woman who had been pushed to the edge and refused to fall over. An ordinary woman who had learned that sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is simply refuse to disappear. Evelyn stood at the window, watching the sun set over the Atlantic. Beside her, Dorothea sat in the chair that had once felt like it belonged to no one, and now felt like it belonged to everyone. They did not speak. They did not need to. The sea moved in its eternal rhythm. The light faded from gold to rose to purple. The first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Evelyn knew the wheels of justice were slowly turning. The documents she had preserved were being examined. The cases were being built. The machine of displacement was being exposed gear by gear, crime by crime. It would take years, maybe decades. But it had already begun, and that was enough. "This house," Dorothea said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. Evelyn turned to look at her. "It feels different," Dorothea continued, "from any place I've ever been." Evelyn nodded. "It is different," she said. She looked back at the sea. It was built by a man who lost everything she said. He designed it to protect the truth, to preserve evidence that no one else would preserve, to wait for someone who would understand. She paused. He couldn't fight them himself, but he could make sure that someday someone would. Dorothea was silent for a moment. "And now you're that someone," she said. Evelyn shook her head. "Now we are," she said. She looked at Dorothea. "You're not a guest here," she said. "You're a witness, just like me. Just like everyone who comes after us." Her voice was firm. "They took your home. They took mine. They took thousands of homes from thousands of families over dozens of years." She turned to face the window again. "But they couldn't take this place, and they couldn't take the truth. And as long as this house stands, as long as there are people willing to stay in it, that truth will survive." The last light faded from the sky. The stars burned cold and bright above the sea. And in the villa on the cliff, two women who had lost everything sat together in the darkness, guarding a legacy they had not asked for and could not abandon. Evelyn thought about Marcus Whitfield, about the 40 years he had spent building this place, gathering evidence, preparing for a fight he knew he would not live to see. She thought about Walter, about the home they had built together, about the love that had sustained her for 42 years and sustained her still even now. She thought about the families in those files, the names and faces, the lives that had been disrupted, displaced, erased. And she thought about the future. Somewhere out there were others like Dorothea, people who had been pushed out of their homes, their lives, their sense of belonging, people who had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Some of them would find their way here. She would make sure of it. The villa by the sea had been built to wait, but its waiting was over. Now, it was time to begin. Evelyn closed her eyes. For the first time in months, she felt something she had thought she would never feel again. Peace. Not the peace of surrender, not the peace of giving up, the peace of purpose. She had lost everything, and in losing everything she had found something she had never known she was looking for. A reason to stay, a truth to protect, a legacy to continue. The house settled around her. The old wood sighed and creaked. The windows rattled softly in their frames. But it was not the sound of decay. It was the sound of life, of a place that had been waiting for so long, finally beginning to fulfill its purpose, of secrets that had been hidden for decades finally coming into the light, of ordinary people who had been told they didn't matter, finally proving that they did. Evelyn opened her eyes. The night was dark. The sea was calm. The stars burned on. And in the villa by the sea, surrounded by the evidence of crimes that would finally be answered, Evelyn Mercer kept watch, patient, ready.